Good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon's proceedings are being live streamed, but after a 15-minute delay. Those with mobile telephones may use them to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 15 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. They may not be used for recording or photography. Yes.
Thank you. There were just a couple of intelligence documents that I wanted to take you to in relation to HN18's reporting on the dicey arrest issue. MPS 0076348, please. So that's the document that we were looking at just before the break. From the 10th of October 2007, and the second document is MPS 0076336. And if we can have the next page up on screen as well, please. We can see that this is another extensive report reproducing in detail the letter that was sent from a solicitor about the circumstances around a barrister providing pro bono representation at court. So again,
yes,
not needing to go into the detail of it, but you can see essentially setting out the solicitor's concerns, the dealings with the barrister, the information that was given to the defendants at court, naming chambers, solicitors' firms, etc. So both of those two intelligence reports combined on two separate dates from HN18 following his arrest and appearance at court in relation to the group that was arrested outside the Excel Centre on the 11th of September 2007. What concerns do you have that firstly this wasn't brought to your attention, as was your evidence before lunch, but seemingly steps had not been taken to prevent him reporting on these sensitive issues, and in particularly in light of the fact that DCI Flood was aware of the sensitivities around LPP and such like. What do you say went wrong here?
it's hard for me to know. I don't know if either DCI Flood or Detective Superintendent McKinney would have seen these documents. I don't know. There's no basis for this information to be put in this format. This strikes the heart of LPP. It shouldn't be here. I wasn't aware of it. It probably, again, adds to the justification around the behaviours that need to be stopped. I'm absolutely certain I've not seen this document before, and I don't agree with its existence. It shouldn't be written, and it shouldn't have encroached on this legally privileged information.
Moving then to a document behind tab B71, MPS 0748821. A document headed Operational Head Comments.
Yes.
Signed off by DCI Flood, seen by Julian McKinney, dated the 22nd of the 10th, 2007. Do you recognise this document as a setting out the lessons learned effectively from this arrest?
I don't know.
It was provided in your bundle, but are you saying you didn't see it at the time?
That's right, yeah, I've not seen it previously. I don't believe I have, forgive me with the passage of time, I don't believe I've seen this.
Okay. We can see that there's a lessons learned element to it. I've spoken halfway down the page. I've spoken at length with HN72 about what occurred prior to and subsequent to the arrest. This situation will be managed much more closely in future, with more awareness of the strategy deployed by Gold at any future events. HN72 has decided to move from the SDS and has been replaced at this time by DI Horsley, who is presently completing a review of all the systems and processes. In terms of HN72 moving on, was that something that you had directed, or had he agreed to move on in any event, and was DI Horsley lined up to take his place before the arrest?
Yeah, I think my recollection, and I think there's a contradiction. My recollection is that I directed. I think HN72 was a product of the SDS. My assessment was that, understandably, nobly, he was most focused on the interests of the operatives, which I understand and is a function that he had. But also he's got to be responsible to the deployments, collateral intrusion, LPP, the implications of each of those intelligence deployments of UCOs. And I don't think he was sufficiently objective and sensed he was resistant. So I know there'd been a challenging relationship between him, or an emerging challenging relationship between him, I think, and DCI Flood. I know from papers that HN72, from what I've read, elected to leave the SDS. Had he not left, I would have ensured that he was required to leave the SDS and would have replaced him with somebody from outside of the command. I think it's at paragraph 204 of my statement, say that's my recollection, but if it was in any way different, I apologise, but my recollection was that I directed I wanted him off.
In terms of people coming in from outside the command, is that what you see as a benefit in terms of a fresh pair of eyes to look at what was going on with the SDS, somebody not ingrained in the SO12 culture?
Yeah, it was very parochial. It was very much siege mentality in many ways. What we needed to do was transition that unit, like we were trying to transition SO12 and SO13 into this new command of SO15, and bringing in people with different, broader experiences from outside of SO13, SO12, experiences of covert policing from the Serious Crime Directorate Command in the Met, was a beneficial and healthy thing to do.
Was there a danger that people without a background in SB didn't actually understand the intricacies of the work or the importance of intelligence on public order issues?
So I think this inquiry has shown the risks, the dangers of that inward-looking approach. The failures of this unit come from this refusal to learn lessons, apply disciplinary processes to people who transgress the standards of policing. Public order is a incredibly well-managed issue within the Metropolitan Police. The SDS was one component part of how that was managed. And I think that your proposal is what got us into quite a lot of trouble by not actually having a broader view of what was happening and the lessons learned in undercover policing elsewhere.
In terms of people moving on from the SDS to different areas of policing within the Met, what checks and balances were put in place to ensure that those types of behaviours were not replicated elsewhere?
So is this, sorry, forgive me, people leaving the SDS to go to
other parts of the MPS, different areas?
Okay. By and large, and I don't have the data, the effort was always made to accommodate where operatives who were leaving the SDS wanted to go. I think you'll be aware in this inquiry they're often given a significant amount of time off afterwards. I'm not sure of the value of that because they had been in such an intensive role for such a protracted period. I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. More should have been done with regards to their welfare. But there are or were processes in place with regards to transitioning them back into policing. In the main, I think they went into fairly discrete areas of policing. A lot of them stayed in special branch, in areas of special branch. And there was very continually, especially when the decision was taken to close down the SDS, conversations, particularly with me and Julian McKinney and towards Frankie, around the well-being and welfare of those officers. What I will say, and it might preempt a question, these officers didn't want to do the NUTAC course, which was a very challenging course and pass-fail with an attrition rate of about 50%. Whatever was put in place for them, to a certain degree, they were not going to be happy because they were not being allowed to stay within that environment of the SDS. So this was always going to be a real challenge about where we relocated those officers. And I know, so I've known Frankie Flood for a very, very long time. We worked very closely together. He, like I, was very aware of the psychological challenges of doing undercover work and the need to look after people who'd been involved in it, especially in this extremely, I will say, damaging environment of being deployed for so long. But I am aware that a number of the operatives felt that they weren't properly supported.
We can look at the welfare topic in a little bit more detail later on. In terms of HN772 and other managers moving on into different areas of policing, what was put in place to train, ensure that similar practices that had happened within Special Branch weren't being replicated under their watch elsewhere?
So the area within then SO15 of undercover work was solely the SDS. We were transitioning into what was to become known as the Special Projects Team. The behaviours, the tradecraft, if I could call it that, of undercover activity within SDS wasn't applicable anywhere else, so he wouldn't have been applying that methodology anywhere else. There was, I know, and I'm sure documentation will be available, a process with regards to welfare and support, psychological support, around officers who were in the SDS and then were transitioned out. I haven't got those details to hand, but it was something that I know DCI Flood was very mindful about.
In terms of what we see here, the last sentence of the paragraph that's put up on the screen in front of you, DI Horsley was conducting a review of all the systems and processes. In terms of that review, do you recall whether that was just in relation to arrests of SDS officers, or was that across the board?
I'm afraid I'm not sure of that. I can't help. I'd be speculating. Can I just return to your previous question, just one point? I think the question was something about not taking the behaviours from within the SDS to other parts of either the command or the Met. Of course, I need to underscore that we didn't know. I didn't know. I don't believe DCI Flood or Detective Superintendent McKinney or indeed Commander McDowell or DAC Clark or Temporary Assistant Commissioner Clark knew of the behaviours that you have been able to identify through this inquiry. Those behaviours were not known to, well, certainly not known to me, and I don't believe they were known to those parties I've just mentioned either.
In terms of your understanding of what was going wrong, keeping it within the arrest scenario here, was it an issue with not having the systems and processes in place, or was it a failure of communication of what those systems and processes were?
I think this was simply with regards to Hastings, an application of the existing SDS laissez-faire approach to arrest, which contradicted what I'm very clear in my mind DCI Flood and Detective Superintendent McKinney and others before them had been seeking to install into the methodology of how the SDS undercover deployments were undertaken. So we weren't making the progress that we'd been seeking.
You can see down at the bottom of this document, the current situation. You can see here that this paragraph seems to indicate that the operation of HN18, Commonweal CW,
Yes.
remains proportionate to the intelligence dividend we continuously seek. So it suggests that his deployment is to continue. Would that be a sentiment that you would agree with, knowing what you knew at the time in relation to his deployment?
I think DCI Flood and Detective Superintendent McKinney were becoming more and more aware of my position on these deployments in their entirety, and I was not part of the authorisation process. It's something I have considerable experience in, and I would not share the view that this was a proportionate use of the undercover tactic. And I think this is dated the 22nd of October of 2007. Within weeks of that minute, I approached Assistant Commissioner Clark to close the unit down and all of the deployments.
We can see that his renewal was due in a month's time. Was any communication had with McDowell, Commander McDowell, who was the authorising officer in relation to that?
I can't recall, although I will say that Mr. McDowell was very well aware of my views having arrived. Obviously, this is during the period of me coming to, in simple terms, the conclusion that it was too far gone to change and transition the SDS. I don't know what the subsequent review, if it occurred, shows. I wasn't part of that process, but the generality of the position that I had was becoming better understood by both Mr. Clark and Mr. McDowell, and I think they agreed with my position.
Thank you. If we can move on to a separate topic, racism in the Met. In your witness statement at page 21, paragraph 99, you say that you didn't witness any racism or sexism as a DCS in SO15.
That's correct. I have witnessed racism and sexism within the Met, but the question was within my period of time as the Detective Chief Superintendent in charge of the covert functions, just to clarify.
And what you witnessed in other parts of your career, does that fit within the understanding of institutional racism within the Met?
I think there's grounds to say that, yes.
In terms of not experiencing any racism or sexism as a DCS in SO15, was that something that you were alive to? Did you inquire about it? Were you asking questions around those issues? Because
of what I was undertaking at the time, I don't specifically remember that, I have to say no. And when I say about, I interpreted the question to me as with regards to the deployments, I wasn't seeing a lot of the intelligence material. I wasn't seeing the intelligence material. So it was unlikely that I would have been made aware of any of those types of behaviours anyway, because I didn't have line of sight of that material, basically. So that's why I answered the question in the way I did.
We had the Macpherson report in
Yes.
1999, finding institutional racism in the Met. And in your experience, did that lead to greater awareness of racist approaches to policing and the efforts to eliminate it?
Yes, and I remember studying the Macpherson report. Later on, after this period, I became the ACPO or MPCC lead for race, religion and belief, and was heavily involved in promoting issues around race within wider policing.
To your understanding, were there any mechanisms or guidance in place in 2007 to assess for the impact of SDS operations on the human rights of those affected, including the risk of discrimination on grounds of race, sex and other protected characteristics?
So I know there'd been training as a result of the Macpherson report for Met-wide training for all of us to do with regards to those issues. I am now aware, and it wasn't during my tenure as the DCS, that training was declined or not undertaken by the SDS on the basis of a decision by the management at the time.
I think by the time you come into line management of the SDS, most officers had actually undertaken the specific, post-Macpherson anti-racism training prior to them joining the SDS. So I think under your watch, most people had engaged with that training. But you're right. Earlier on, that had been said to be something that SDS officers couldn't engage with. What's your opinion about the inability of the SDS to engage in that training?
So in my view, that would have been the wrong decision. I can understand. This is an extremely sensitive tactic. It needs to be protected. It is by necessity secret. We've moved things seismically with regards to the way the tactic is now deployed. And I assume the thinking was this would bring trainers in, police officers, police staff who are trainers, to train the SDS, which would expose that unit to more people. What should have happened is there should have been a mechanism put in place for SB to deliver their own version of that training, having got trained by the trainers, if I may say, to deliver that. There are always ways to make sure that those requirements are undertaken, and from my understanding that didn't happen, and it should have happened.
Were you aware at the time of any racist assumptions within SO15 or SDS policing, and in particular targeting of particular groups, black, other ethnic minority political groups, and were they seen as a greater threat to public order?
So at the time, I had no knowledge of anything like that. Subsequently, and I don't know when I became aware, but years later, and potentially through this inquiry, and Mark Ellison's report, I remember I went to speak to Mark Ellison when he did his report. In fact, I got Mark to come to I was head of covert policing for RIPA and undercover, and I got Mark to come and talk to authorising officers about his report. I became aware of the activities that were deployed against the Lawrence family. I wasn't aware at the time.
In considering HN18, Robert Hastings' deployment and his targeting of ISM London, that group showed solidarity with displaced people in the Palestinian territories and those at risk of action by Israel. Were you alive to the need to consider the risk of racism in reporting on such groups and the individuals involved?
I go back to hopefully the position I've set out quite clearly, this tactic shouldn't have been used against those groups per se. I wasn't aware of any mindset that existed that tactic was delivered because of any racial grounds. But all of those considerations, through a properly managed authorisation and deployment, should be articulated, documented and managed to make sure that nothing such as racial profiling, racism, sexism, anything like that would be allowed to enter the mindset of anybody around using not just this tactic but in any element of policing.
We've heard from one of the core participants in this inquiry, Atif Chowdhury, who was the only man of Asian Muslim heritage involved in ISM London at the time of Robert Hastings's deployment,
Right.
but he'd largely withdrawn from activism by the time HN18 arrived. Yet we have seen reports that report on him extensively, including his personal life, his family. We know that Robert Hastings, Mr. Chowdhury says, DJ'd at his sister's wedding. Evidence that Mr. Chowdhury says caused him significant pain, and that the memory of that he expressed in his evidence given to this inquiry on the 19th of March of this year. Significantly, it appears that anyone associated with him appeared to be fair game for reporting on. That scope of reporting appears to have been centred particularly on him. Were you aware of that reporting on that individual in that way?
No, I was not.
We know from a list of associates of HN18s listed on his REPA docket, and this is behind tab B73, MPS 0526935 at page 3. So, MPS 0526935 behind tab B73, page 3. This is I hope, a composite of REPA authorisation documents for HN18 Robert Hastings. I've got that right. 0526935. So this is a front page.
Nice.
If we can just enlarge that a little bit, please. We can see that Mr. Chowdhury is listed at the top of this list of associates of HN18, along with 2 suicide bombers.
Yes.
Mr. Hanif and Mr. Sharif,
Yeah.
who had died well over a year before he entered the field.
Yeah.
So we understand that they were both involved in an attack on the 30th of April 2003. On the 25th of April 2003, 5 days before the attack, Mr. Hanif and Mr. Sharif had visited an ISM office over in the Palestinian territories, and after chatting for 15 minutes with an ISM volunteer, the men briefly joined a group of 20 people who were commemorating Rachel Corrie's death, who was a young American woman who had been killed by machinery in Palestinian territories. Notably, Mr. Chowdhury had no association with those suicide bombers at all, and it was determined before he joined the field that there was no connection with ISM London.
Yes.
the fact that he appears in this list, named side by side with these two suicide bombers, would that cause you some concern about racial profiling, about racist approaches to reporting on this group and this individual in particular?
I don't know if it would cause me concerns about racial profiling. I know something about the two suicide bombers. I think that was Mike's bar. I remember that particular incident. Yeah. What, again, I can't countenance and is unjustified is the attention that Mr. Chowdhury received from the SDS, because it was completely unjustified and disproportionate. I haven't got any information or anything to suggest to me that that was on racial grounds. And I don't know enough about the background to the authority and the thinking with regards to that particular authorisation. But again, it goes to the issue of the lack of justification for the use of this tactic. And I can't really help any more than that, I'm afraid.
Had you seen the Ripper docket for HN18?
I don't believe so, no.
HN18 entered the field in autumn 2004.
Right.
He was still infiltrating ISM and the personal life of Atif Chowdhury 3 years later. And we've heard from Mr. Dell, DCI Dell, that he said ISM London was supposed to be a jumping off point only to report on other groups, rather than ISM being a justified target in itself, and that he was disappointed that HN18 had remained focused on ISM London. That was his evidence to this inquiry on the 1st of July of this year. Was it your understanding that HN18 was still properly targeted towards ISM at the time when you took over?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer that question because I don't recall. I'm not sure if, in fact, in advance of his arrest, I was aware, particularly of his deployment, if I'm frank. What I am bound to say again is, during this period, and I mentioned Maya earlier, who was a neighbour of Mr. Chowdhury, this entire episode of the SDS with Hastings and the deployment and the activity of a police officer affecting Mr. Chowdhury, Maya and many others, particularly I'm taken to Maya's statement, was wholly wrong, entirely unjustified, and should never have happened.
Would you have expected that to have been something handed over to you in some kind of briefing document or a briefing meeting where HN18 is deployed in these areas? This one was just a stepping stone to other areas. How is it that you hadn't been briefed on each of the UCO's areas of deployment?
Well, I made myself busy in finding out what the deployments had been and when they were authorised. I remember doing that in sort of high-level terms. I think some of what you are now asking, I'm very clear that DCI Flood, most definitely, and to a certain extent, Superintendent McKinney would have been working to understand what the history of those deployments were. And I think I introduced a way of thinking to this, which shook everything up a little bit and I think made people realise that none of these deployments could continue. So there was no handover to me to deal with, if you like, the intrusion into the privacy, the collateral intrusion of the different operational deployments. I think that would have been a significant handover because I'm quite confident it happened across almost all of the deployments. And of course, even with some of the behaviours that I'm now aware of, I should never have inherited the SDS because it shouldn't have existed. It should have been dealt with far in advance of me becoming the Detective Chief Superintendent because of the serious misconduct that had occurred years before and repeatedly.
Something as vital as an organisation being a stepping stone to other groups, would you have expected that to have been written down and made clear for successive managers?
Around that sort of methodology, that might be something, and maybe if Frankie was here to talk to this inquiry, he could explain anything that was handed over in that fashion. I would have expected far more detail to have been handed over to successive predecessors that we described in my earlier testimony around the intricacies of these deployments, and I just don't think that happened. I think the modus operandi of this unit was to keep everything as close as they possibly could within the family of the SDS. Various senior officers, and I'll say from superintendent upwards, had been in recent times trying to penetrate that to understand the legitimacy or otherwise of the unit. And those conversations that you describe now should have been part of that process, but I don't think they occurred.
The fact that he was so focused on a Palestinian solidarity movement, was this indicative of an operation stained with racism to a degree?
It's really hard for me to comment on that. I honestly don't know. The entirety of these deployments cause me huge concern. Underlying issues of racism, I don't know enough about what was in the minds of those who selected these groups and these individuals. What groups and individuals they considered, because it's still quite a finite resource, the SDS, with regards to numbers. I don't know enough about that process. But with regards to what I do know about the SDS, I'd have concerns with regards to all of the conduct, with regards to the authorisations and the deployments, as to how the decision-making was arrived at for them. None of it makes sense to me.
And in that respect, then, any retrospective view of the operations that touched on the Black Justice campaigns and the family justice campaigns of Stephen Lawrence, Ricky Reel, Michael Menson, from what you now know, can you see that there may have been a prejudice towards those families in that they are black, they're Asian, and therefore more of a threat to either public order or the reputation of the police?
So in regards to that question, I have to say in the families that you've just mentioned, who've been through unimaginable challenges and heartache, I can absolutely see that there is potentially some real prejudice towards those groups who should never, ever, any of those groups that you've mentioned or campaigns to support those families should never have been targeted with this tactic, never.
We know that in some respects, in some of the operations, peaceful vigils, funerals had been attended and reported on, where there was no public order implication at all to those events. I take your evidence is that should never have been part of the operation in any event. But given that it was, would you have expected a report to say nothing to see here, as opposed to a report detailing members of the families and the events on those occasions?
Where there was a determination in any undercover operation for somebody to engage with regards to specific individuals, to gain confidence, familiarity, authenticity, in a legend role, in a UC deployment. None of the reporting that you've described in some of this morning's documents or testimony that I've seen around the privacy of those individuals should be reported on and is not justified, and should certainly never have been part of any intelligence collection whatsoever. And that should have been managed through both the cover officers and the DI and the higher chain of command of those officers, but also there should have been an audit, a record through the authorisation process to make sure that that wasn't happening.
And presumably that goes all the way up the chain of command, where senior officers, the Commissioner, the Home Office are reading annual reports from the SDS.
Yeah, nobody was asking the questions about how this unit operated. And you know here of the serious misdemeanours that have occurred that, on my analysis, were covered up. And they should never have been covered up. They should have been investigated and dealt with, either through the Professional Standards Department in the Metropolitan Police, or, I would suggest more appropriately, by an independent force and senior officer from outside.
And in terms of some of the reporting that we know about being on the papers, that were the dots there that were available to be joined up to create the picture of what was going on, yet nobody did that exercise, in your view?
I don't think there were dots. From what I've seen, the information was known. This wasn't something that required any particular detective application. People had reported the Officers A and B case, the Gold Group management of that, the information that those officers provided in their evidence, the covering up of a significant number of officers' misconduct, failing to deal with it. It was almost endemic. All the signs were there. I am lost. I am lost, and I don't understand how this wasn't dealt with.
And that's not just at the UCO level,
No.
but at the manager level within SDS, and beyond that, the senior manager level outside of the SDS. Is that right?
So, in my opening remarks, I tried to express my anger, really, about the behaviours of the officers, the operatives. But this was allowed to happen over a period of time that should never have been permitted. And reports that set out very clearly about what those officers have been engaged in over many, many, many years existed within Special Branch. And this inquiry will determine in an adjudication about how and why that was allowed to continue, but that's a lack of leadership, that's a lack of responsibility from senior officers who should have dealt with these issues clinically, decisively and quickly, and none of that happened.
Thank you. Before moving on to the next topic, I just want to correct something I said earlier, actually, and in relation to this suicide bombing of Mike's Bar. I think I said it was in Palestinian territories. Of course it wasn't. It was in Tel Aviv, in Israel.
It's Israel, yeah.
Reporting on legal professional privilege and court hearings and lawyers, another element to that. Reporting specifically on the lawyers who were involved in representing those who were reported on. Mike Mansfield, KC, had a registry file, we understand, and was described within Special Branch as the devil incarnate. Were you aware of that at the time?
I was not aware of that, no.
Is that something you've come to be aware of?
I've come to be aware of it through this inquiry.
Imran Khan, KC, was the representative of the Lawrence family, and he was reported on in some of the reports that we have seen. Other lawyers like Louise Christian, the solicitor involved in the Austin against the Met litigation, and we understand from Peter Francis' witness statement, Helena Kennedy, KC, also had a special branch file. These sorts of reports, is that, what do you say about that in terms of why they might be reported on specifically?
So it's important I say Michael Mansfield has cross-examined me and I have huge respect for him. Imran Khan, I have applied for warrants of further detention in terrorist cases where he's represented those people that I'm applying for the warrantry against, and he's been nothing but professional and, in fact, supportive, and I particularly remember during the events of the bombings of 2005. And Helena Kennedy is somebody I have huge respect for and know. And I cannot think of any justification for any of those people to be subject to any of the intelligence gathering of the SDS, so-called intelligence gathering.
Was there any discussion amongst senior managers within the MPS about the threat to the MPS reputation caused by cases brought against the Met arising out of some of the incidents that these lawyers were involved with?
I don't recall any such conversations, and if there were conversations like that, they were completely misconceived. A police service needs to be held to account. Healthy accountability and scrutiny means that we get policing with public trust. The irony of this is the people who are actually helping us get public trust by making sure we were held to account were actually being spied on by the police without any justification whatsoever. And it should never have happened.
We've looked at the policy relating to reports that include confidential material, LPP, and that would have to be reported to higher levels, and reviews conducted with in expedited reviews. Was the policy inadequate to protect LPP and cases and those involved in cases brought against the Met, or was it that the practice simply wasn't or the policies simply weren't being put into practice?
That's a very fair question, in that the checks and balances around covert policing are always improving. Through experience, we are constantly and continually improving how we deploy the tactics and making sure they're justified, proportionate, necessary, and are legally based. I think we've had recent legislation in 2021, which is the Covert Human Intelligence Source Criminal Conduct Act. Things have improved very much since this period of time. I think there is a need to make sure that we don't look at some of the applications through today's standards, because we have learnt a huge amount, and a huge amount through this inquiry. However, and this is an important however, and I don't change my position, the justification for the deployments against these community and protest groups was entirely unjustified on what I know about those deployments and those authorisations. And that played a significant part in my approach to Temporary Assistant Commissioner Clark to draw these authorisations to a close.
In terms of the Austin litigation, are you familiar with the case of Austin against the MPS?
I don't think I am.
Initially, it was a claim brought by Miss Austin and others in relation to their kettling in Oxford Circus in 2001 during the May Day parade. And that was over false imprisonment, Article 5 breaches. That ultimately went up to the European Court of Human Rights. The actual event took place on May Day 2001.
Okay.
The case that she brought was heard by the High Court in 2005, and we understand that one of the undercover officers that was there in Oxford Circus briefed the MPS counsel on the night that the eve of her giving evidence to the High Court trial, and that in some clandestine meeting, HN104 Carlo Soraki was able to meet with counsel for the Met and give a brief description about Lois Austin. The details of it are subject to findings, but we understand that he was able to talk about Lois Austin and the case and what he understood, or information that he had was disclosed to the Met Council. So this is a little different. This is not intelligence being provided in relation to the public order event. It's intelligence being provided by an undercover officer who was there at the public event, but in relation to his knowledge of the claimants in the process of litigation. Were you aware of that sort of practice being used, and officers, undercover officers from Special Branch being used in that capacity in cases brought against the Met?
I'm absolutely no knowledge of that whatsoever. And it sounds troubling that counsel would have been receiving that sort of information, but I don't know anything about that.
So would you accept that that is misuse of an undercover officer as essentially a spy in the camp of the claimants?
It's entirely inappropriate. On the description you've given me, that is entirely inappropriate. And because of the involvement of counsel, I'm very surprised that took. I'm sure you'll be correct, but I'm very surprised that took place, and that should not take place.
Moving on to a report that was written by DS HN315, who's somebody that's in your cipher list. It's behind tab B72 MPS 0527012. Page 4, please.
Yes.
This was a report for the business case for the SDS, dated the 5th of February 2008. On page 5, we have the contents in terms of the areas that were considered. Is this on page 6, we can see the second entry. Your name appears. Is this you having approved the report?
I don't recall it. I recall, and I'm sure I would have been aware of it, forgive me, it's just the passage of time. I recall work being done to look at the finances of SDS, which I think Julian McKinney led on, bringing in experts from outside of Special Branch and SO12 to look at that. And I know the author of this report, and I know he was doing a lot of work to try to help us professionalise the SDS, basically.
We can look at page 14, which is the conclusion of this report. It must be the page just above. Sorry, paragraph 14 then. I'm not sure on the page. 14.1, I'll give you a moment just to have a look at that. So was it your view as of February 2008 that the SDS was to continue in some form?
What I wouldn't have called it SDS. I've mentioned the Special Projects Team, which I think is a name that survived around the networking of undercover units across the country. This, from my recollection and reading the conclusion, is about the pillars being put in place to build a new contemporary undercover capability to deal with the threats that we then faced in national security.
Behind tab B74, please, MPS 0749170. This is a report of a meeting with the Met Federation,
Yes.
of which you were present. You can
Yes.
see your name at the top.
Yeah.
And essentially it's to do with welfare concerns in large part.
Yes.
And you had asked for any concerns about the SDS to go through you, and you would send them up to Commander Dowell and DAC Clark. Is that
Yes.
essentially what we see there in the introduction? Paragraph 2, it was the SDS officers that had called in the Federation rep.
Right.
And it was obviously to address issues that were of concern to them and to represent them at the meeting. Of particular interest was overtime that was going to be cut.
Yes.
Do you recall chairing this meeting?
I don't. I really don't, forgive me. But what I do know is that I was pretty fastidious in making sure that the various allowances, and forgive me, I can't remember the detail, I think they were claiming overnight allowances, subsistence allowances, and the considerable overtime, and they were showing us continually on duty, and it was part of the failure to manage the unit, would be dealt with in line with how, and I'd come from very much a role in the undercover space in the Serious Crime Directorate part of the Met, that there was a consistency around approach to the terms and conditions, really, for officers who did undercover work. And that hadn't really been looked at, I don't think, for some time, from recollection. And I think Julian, if my memory is right, Julian led on a lot of this. Although Frankie Flood did so much of the work, and I can't praise both men highly enough, actually, for the commitment that they showed throughout the period of time in trying to change things for the better.
In terms of the handwritten note that's there, I think that's DCI Flood's handwritten note about additional finance for Climate Camp and DSCI, etc.
Okay, yeah.
Was it right that, mid November 2007, there was still an ongoing need to invest in these operations, despite the thought that actually we need to start wrapping this up?
Yeah, I don't recall that because, and forgive me, the inquiry will have the details of when we closed the last authority down. There may have been some reasons to protect the operational activity of what had occurred in those latter stages of the SDS's existence, to continue some of the authorities so as to not compromise the officers as police officers, as SDS officers. But I don't recall, I'm afraid, the reason for that comment from Frankie.
Paragraph 5 talks about the amalgamation between SO 12 and 13, causing some distress to the special branch officers, and snippets of rumours concerning these officers around corruption. What in particular was it that was engaging rumours of corruption?
Can I see that? Sorry, is that...
Paragraph 5, just at the very bottom.
I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't recall. I don't know what that's about, unless it was about the unethical payments, I thought, that were being made to the officers that shouldn't have been. But that's just me trying to be helpful. I can't be precise, I'm sorry.
On page 2, paragraph 3, we can see at the very end of that paragraph, the officers need to be aware of good housekeeping, and there are other issues that need to be dealt with. In terms of good housekeeping in the SDS, that seems to have been one thing, but other issues that need to be dealt with. Was there a sense that there were significant issues which couldn't be put down in writing?
I don't think, not to my recollection. I think I mentioned previous to, I think it's paragraph 612 of my statement, where I list the concerns I had around the SDS. I'd certainly, please don't think that I wouldn't have been open in recording my concerns in writing.
This isn't part of the cover-up where matters of sex can't be put down in writing because it would... No,
I can categorically say, and there'll be no documents that you'll produce where I knew anything about any of those relationships and what was happening. I had no idea until this inquiry. And I should say the commencement of Operation Hearn and some of the things that Hearn described to me.
Paragraph 4, the next paragraph down, talks of shortcomings will be covered by other means. So JB has spoken to DSU McKinney and was assured that shortcomings will be covered by other means, and the decision was made that officers now attend the NUTAC course for development and obtain proper accredited training for undercover work.
Yeah.
Those shortcomings relating to, I know I can see that it's been redacted, but in terms of the shortcomings that you were aware of, did any of those relate to the misconduct that we're talking about today?
The misconduct that I've described in some of the testimonies I'm now aware of, I had absolutely no idea about, and I would have dealt with them. They would have been elevated to Mr. Clark, and I can absolutely state that they would have been dealt with properly and robustly.
The next paragraph down, please. Paragraph 5. Addresses trying to bring the SDS into modern covert policing, and it is now a matter of getting it right with tradecraft and mechanism. There will also be a consultation with DSU blank by DSU Boutcher. This has already occurred, but will continue. And ex-SDS officers have been spoken to informally for their views and noted that officers should go on courses. In terms of getting it right with tradecraft,
yes,
was the tradecraft document something you were aware of at that time?
I don't believe I was, no, which I'm embarrassed about when I saw the papers, but I don't recall it. It's a long time ago.
You actually address it at page 56 of your witness statement, and it might be that we can bring that up now.
Yeah. I think I maybe know of its existence, but I don't recall seeing it.
So you talk of a set of reports, perhaps in a binder. When did you discover that? Can you recall at what time? or
Sorry.
how you became aware of that.
I'm sorry, I can't now.
If we can have the second page up as well, because it's at paragraph 264 and 265. So this
Yeah, thank
in-house
you.
manual that you were aware of.
Yeah, I've written, obviously, in my statement, I have a vague recollection that was informed of an in-house manual. I'm not sure that I saw it. I have no recollection now, I'm afraid.
MPS 0527597, which is one of the documents that's flagged up there in the box in bold.
Yes.
This was the main part
Right.
of the SDS Tradecraft Manual. I think it's a 42-page document.
Right.
Going to the next page, in terms of the contents page, we can see just on the first page of the table of contents down at the bottom, number 5, maintenance, 5.5 and 5.6 talks about alcohol and drugs and sexual liaisons. Had you seen this document, would that have sparked your interest, or would you have read it?
I never saw this document. I explained when I attended the NUTAC course, this was dealt with very clearly and robustly. This is, I didn't know anything about this.
And given that training was of such a concern of yours, and in particular DCI floods, in terms of getting officers onto the NUTAC course,
Yes.
had you asked questions about training and what officers were currently being trained on during your tenure?
So I can't remember the conversations, for which I apologise, but I know I will have done. And I know there was, and I don't know if it's through papers that I've read here or through the time that this occurred, there was somebody who did some analysis on the NUTAC course. You referenced something with regards to that earlier. I, in my statement, do something of an analysis of the SDS, I would say, familiarisation process. I don't think it could be described as a training course in comparison to the then NUTAC course. And I'm absolutely certain I did that exercise at the time in circa late 2007, 2008. And I then determined, and I know DCI Flood agreed, it was probably a decision actually that he, Superintendent McKinney, and I came to, that because of the challenges and the behaviours and trying to change things, that the operatives would need to go on the NUTAC course because of the protections that would afford them and the people against whom they were deployed.
Did you attend at the off-site safe house for the SDS?
I know I've been there, but I can't remember the details, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Were you shown policy documents or anything like that when you were there?
I have no recollection whatsoever. And I want to reiterate, anything around alcohol, drugs, sexual liaisons, I would have been all over. And none of that was brought to my attention. I never saw any of that.
Is that the sort of thing you would have asked to have seen? Is that a failure of somebody not digging deep enough to find this stuff to put before you, or...?
What I'd say is, because of what this inquiry has heard and read, it's clearly, rightfully, a real focus. At the time that I was engaged in transitioning the SDS into the Special Projects team and the decision to close it down, these were not issues that I was aware about. So they weren't issues that I was focused on. And my training had been very much that this was completely prohibited. And there are ways to deal with situations that operatives would get themselves into to manage this so that you don't transgress. So it wasn't a live issue for me at the time. Obviously, we now know, as I say, it was almost systemic, but I didn't know anything about that.
Moving to closure of the SDS, The last SDS authority was cancelled on the 11th of January 2008, and that was
Okay.
in relation to HN79,
Right. Thank
we
you.
understand. In your witness statement at page 137, you list the summary of those considerations that
Yes.
led to your decision to close, and you've made reference to this already in your evidence. Working through these, you've addressed a lot of this already in the evidence that you've given today. But if we can just touch on each of these, there are 13 items. The first, lack of direction and control. You say at paragraph 21 of your witness statement that discussions were held with DAC Clark and Commander McDowell regarding various concerns about the style and focus of the SDS deployments set against the current threat picture. And you say that those had been relatively long-standing from your point of view. Is there anything else you want to add to that first item on the list?
No, I think I've articulated my concerns about when that doesn't happen, how the operatives basically will conduct themselves in a way that is unacceptable with regards to risks of aiding, abetting, counselling and procuring offences. And of course, breaches of Article 8, they need to be properly managed.
As well as direction and control, was there also a lack of any boundaries, limits to the operation?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Point 2, insufficient supervision and management of the operatives' behaviour. In your witness statement at paragraph 248, you say this, in the context of welfare provision, you say that the SDS deployments with such limited supervision were of a type which was inherently dangerous as regards the conduct and ethics of the operatives, and that the revelations do not surprise you. In terms of what was inherently dangerous about these operations, can you just expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, I think I mentioned, looking at the statement for Maya and the testimony of Hastings, properly managed through good cover officers. Now cover officers are bespoke officers trained separately. They're not the friends of the undercover officers. They have, cover officers have a loyalty to the welfare, or a focus on the welfare of the undercover officer, but a loyalty to the provisions in legislation to make sure that operations are being conducted properly and managed properly. None of that supervision, which did exist in crime operations at that stage and is much, much stronger now, was demonstrated by the SDS. None of it.
Number 3, absence of justification, proportionality and necessity of the tactic being used for public order. You've addressed that quite a lot already in your evidence today.
Yes.
Were you aware specifically of an instance where DI HN72 and DS HN35?
Did you say 35?
Yes.
Yes.
Sought to copy keys obtained by HN18 Robert Hastings to facilitate covert entry into premises without authorisation.
I wasn't aware of that until I read the papers as part of this inquiry.
What is your view on what should have been the appropriate disciplinary response to that?
Well, I'm not sure about disciplinary for that, but there should have been an authorisation in place. And it again goes to the issue of the inappropriate conduct, in my view, with regards to the justification of some of the actions of the SDS. I'm not sure it reached the threshold of misconduct. Perhaps it did. When I look at what's happened with regards to SDS operatives over the years that should have been investigated criminally, I think what we were doing was, and you've got to take an organisation with you, you've got to take people with you when you're trying to introduce some sort of change management. This was about trying to shift them from one operating model to a different and improved operating model. So I think they would have been spoken to about that, I'm sure, by Superintendent McKinney and DCI Flooder. I'd expect them to have been, and corrected with regards to that activity and what was needed to undertake it.
And in terms of there needing to be any authorisation in place to
Yes.
conduct activities like
Yes.
that would have been a very high bar.
Yes.
And wouldn't have been met in
No.
the context of this operation.
No.
Number 4, extremely limited outcomes of deployments over the previous 5 years. I think that's referring to the value
Yes.
document that we looked at
Yeah.
previously. In that respect, do you mean that the deployments during that period had extremely limited substantive benefits, for example, in terms of preventing serious crime or disorder?
I think the document spoke for itself. I don't think it in any way demonstrated justification for those deployments over the previous 5 years.
Point 5, continuing efforts to resist change by SDS junior managers and operatives. That challenge to change you've addressed at paragraph 220 of your witness statement on page 46. Descriptors have been used for describing the SDS as possessing integrity, transparency and professionalism. And you say that those descriptors are fundamentally wrong.
They're
In your
SDS
view.
descriptors. No independent descriptors, I would suggest, from what I know.
So those were, descriptors used by those within the SDS.
Yes, precisely.
But you wouldn't agree with those.
No.
And you have expressed your views of the SDS as a closed shop, and that was at paragraph 72 of your witness statement, and an insular unit that was immensely secretive. Also, that SO12 was out of touch with wider policing. Did you have any awareness at all if there was any Freemasonry within Special Branch in general and the SDS in particular?
I wasn't actually, no. I'm happy to say I've never been invited to be a Freemason. I don't think that was ever raised as an issue with me. Just because of the points you're now raising, my lawyers gave me access to a document this morning that sort of characterised the resistance of the operatives, the SDS operatives, to DCI Full at one point tried to introduce basically event logs for the operatives to show what they were doing. And we brought in people from outside to try and change how things were happening and to help work with the operatives to show them what we thought would protect them actually and help them and stop them doing these very, very challenging welfare-wise deployments for them. And there was really churlish and poor behaviours to an officer who went in there to try and help them. And that was a document that I had not previously seen that I was shown this morning. And that was during this period that officer tried to do that.
I'm just trying to find the reference for that if you want to address it now. So it's a little early, but it may be that we take a slightly early break and we'll just get the reference for that.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, we have it already.
Fine.
If you want, we'll address it now in the few minutes that we have before 3:30.
Yes.
MPS 0526907. So this was a report. If we go to the next page, please. And the page after that. You see this is a report by HN1656, who was
Yes.
brought in, as you say, to interview the UCOs individually, a personnel review to assess their personalities and their operations, essentially. Meeting with those individual officers on Tuesday, the 2nd of October 2007.
That's correct, yes.
And we can see over the page that Ring Wraith HN118 Simon Wellings was met with the officer, and Common Wheel met with the officer. The summaries of the report in relation to these officers, in particular Common Wheel, was not particularly flattering, if I can put it that way. Over the page, we can see that Hawthorne Ridge was also spoken to, and in conclusion, the officer says that I have concerns about many of the SDS operatives in relation to their suitability and effectiveness. Common Wheel and Hawthorne Ridge both displayed signs of struggling with stressful situations, and with the exception of Ring Wraith, all had poor communication skills. I also questioned their understanding of their roles and objectives. All seemed to have forgotten they were actually serving police officers, and Common Wheel in particular displayed the possible manifestation of Stockholm Syndrome.
Yes.
And we know from HN18's own evidence to this inquiry in March that he was able to address that. Were you supplied with this particular report at the time?
I don't recall it, but I do recall the event log, which was DCI Flood, from my recollection, trying to have an audit of what the UCOs were doing to help manage some of the issues that we've spoken about, what they were doing in far more detail than ever happened before, to then help with advice around collateral intrusion, LPP, as I say, any incitement, agent provocateur issues, to professionalise things. And when HN1656 came in, if you read the entire document, which I know of course you will have done, their attitude towards him is very challenging. And he's just trying to help. He's trying to help.
And we can see at the top of this page that the event logs did not appear to be thorough enough to this officer. Had you seen the event logs, those completed?
I don't recall seeing them, no, I don't, I'm afraid.
We have some of those event logs, and we've shown them in previous hearings, but they are very, very minimal.
Right.
How would you expect to see those completed? How detailed would you expect such event logs to be?
Well, detailed with, an explanation of what the particular deployment was about, what they'd done. It's a control mechanism with regards to managing their activity and helping and supporting that activity in a legal way. But I get a sense from this document that my takeaway from it when I read it this morning is they just weren't engaging with it, with the process.
And how is it that you wouldn't have seen this document then, given the date of it?
I don't know. I don't recall it. I may have seen it, but I honestly don't recall it.
Thank you. And so it may be a good time to break now.
Certainly. Roughly how much longer do you anticipate being before we get to the Rule 10 process?
Between half an hour and an hour.
Yes. Very well.
Please.
So we're making good progress in time to finish comfortably this afternoon.
Yes.
Hope you find that reassuring.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. If we can carry on where we stopped just before the break, please, looking at paragraph 612 of the witness statement on page 137. We've got to point 6 of your list of considerations. So, point 6, training concerns. The existing understanding of SDS operatives' responsibilities regarding RIPA and the European Convention on Human Rights. Training concerns in terms of the Tradecraft Manual. The evidence of Mr. McKinney from yesterday touched on what he said in his witness statement about the Tradecraft Manual coming to his attention as it was brought to him by a member of the SPT, so after the SDS had closed down.
Okay.
And he passed that on to the DPS. Given his evidence, does that help trigger your recollection of when it came to your attention?
Well, I think that reassures me that I've never seen it. If Detective Superintendent McKinney had not seen it, then I would not have seen that document. Can I go back? I'm so sorry about this. The last document that you put up that I was shown this morning in disclosure, could I possibly go back to that document because there's something that
Yes.
I think is quite important that I need to highlight. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's
Forgive me, I've
MPS
forgotten the reference.
0526907. It's HN773's report.
Thank you. That page. So paragraph 4, I think it is, if it could be highlighted. Thank you. May I just read some pertinent points, I think, with regards to what we were trying to do? This is from the officers that have been brought in by DCI Flood to assist with the event logs and support for the officers. The meeting was chaired by DCI Flood. This is the third line. DI HN773 was also present. I listened with interest to the respective bulletins from each of the operatives, but noticed, with the exception of Ring Wraith, all the UCOs addressed their comments to DI HN772 and virtually ignored DCI Flood. Their overt lack of respect for him as, and there's a redaction, the Detective Chief Inspector alarmed me greatly. This general attitude seemed to be condoned by the SDS, DI and DSers. I note that, again, with the exception of Ring Wraith, none of the UCOs appeared to have prepared any notes about what they had been doing in the previous week, and did not even refer to their event logs or intelligence logs as aide memoirs. I found this to be unprofessional and further exacerbated their flippant attitudes. I think that helps, and I don't recall this document, I'm afraid, but I think that's another example of some of the cultural challenges in trying to transition the unit into one that was more modern in its approach to the various issues that we're now dealing with. That demonstrates some of the live challenges that DCI Flood and Detective Superintendent McKinney were encountering. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if we can go back to the witness statement then, please. That's 612. And that point 6 about training. Just before, can we go to another point in the witness statement? Page 150, 680 to 681, you set out in a bit more detail what was inadequate about the SDS training and what how the new TAC case, training is better?
Yes. Thank you.
So we can see on the left-hand side the inadequacies of SDS training and the benefits on the right-hand side of the NUTAC training. Just in terms of the benefits of the NUTAC training, there's no explicit reference to the issue of sexual relationships. Can you explain the absence of that?
Well, I think earlier I referenced the fact that wasn't a live issue at this stage. I know it very much is now for this inquiry. In my NUTAC course, I remember it was addressed with regards to undercover deployments. It wasn't something that I had a reason to be concerned about at that stage. And that's why there's an absence of it there. And also, I think in the...
Sorry, just to be clear, this is the witness statement that you've made for this inquiry. So this is the statement that you made in 2025.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it was at the time why I was trying to put myself, why the NUTAC course would have been more appropriate at the time in 2007, whereby this, what we now know, we didn't know. So I was trying to put my mind's eye to the reasons then as to why the NUTAC course would, in my view, have been more favourable. And also it's important I say, of course, the SDS familiarisation or in-house training, I suppose we could describe it as, was very much predicated on the style of deployment that I didn't want to see continue. The NUTAC course was predicated on a style of deployment, and again I mentioned earlier about those checks and balances around lawyers and barristers and PII processes that provide additional reassurances about conduct and behaviour, the legal input around agent provocateur. That's the type of deployment that I wanted us to go to.
Now, knowing what you know,
Yeah.
would it be appropriate to have a specific, explicit heading in relation to sexual relationships?
Absolutely, yes.
And specific training on that issue? Would that best be scenario-based, or what sort of training would best reinforce the policy around that?
Well, if I can, I think where I put ethical input on operative behaviour, which is, I think, about 5 bullet points up from the bottom of page 151, that would have come under that sort of category, but because of what we now know, it would have been or had its own bullet point and requirement to be part of the training.
In terms of, if we can go back now then please to paragraph 612 please. In terms of the training for UCOs, that's quite clear as you've set out what would be required, but in terms of training for the junior managers, there didn't appear to be any provision for that at the time, at least.
No.
Did you have concerns about that?
I did. What often would happen is sometimes, we now call them COM-UCs, would go on the NUTAC course, managers would go on the NUTAC course as observers. We now, I'm delighted to say, have bespoke training around those functions and roles, which provides a whole wraparound of legal advice, ethics, responsibilities to make sure that that role is done with rigour and integrity, which is something, and that's why it's only right that we look back at that particular time with the training that was available. Things have moved on considerably since then.
So we heard that more senior officers like DSU, McKinney and Commander Williams, they were quite comfortable in what they saw as their knowledge of RIPA requirements, but it was the DCIs, the DIs, and the DSs who appear not to have understood their role quite so clearly. Would you agree with that?
I think the only thing I would, if I may, caveat that with is Detective Superintendent McKinney would have set out his credentials and his experience, and he was a very experienced officer within this field of policing and covert policing. I don't know particularly with regards to Commander Williams, but she was always extremely positive with regards to what we were trying to do with regards to the SDS and the discussions I had with her before I became the Detective Chief Superintendent. But by and large, too many authorising officers did not have training in covert authorities. And particularly chief officers did not have training. That's something that's now been addressed, but it wasn't something that could be relied upon with regards to everyone having the necessary experience and understanding. And I often used to think that, if I may say, detective sergeants would influence in the crime world and SDS world, there would be a similarity here, that those who would present themselves as subject matter experts would often, I think, drive the nature of authorisations, which was wrong. And that was something that I was very alive to at the time, and that we have now very much addressed with regards to policing and the process of management and authorisations today.
Point 7, the high risk of collateral intrusion into the privacy of others. Did you recognise at the time that sexual relationships were at least a risk?
What I will say, having become aware, probably when Hearn started, and forgive me, I don't know the date, a lot of what this inquiry has found, perhaps I'm not surprised about, but I can honestly say I had no idea at the time. Now I can understand how it could have happened because of the lack of rigour. And I did not have any examples of this or specific concerns about it. But in hindsight now, looking at what we now know occurred over a period of many years, I think it was inevitable.
And so should that have been recognised by the officers who were closer to the detail?
That's difficult. Well, I don't know if Detective Superintendent McKinney addressed this or DCI Flood. I think their standards, their approach to this would have been in line with mine. I'm absolutely certain that no officers would have considered that they would have been able to have sexual relationships and those matters not addressed by the management at the time that I was the Detective Chief Superintendent. But again, I think we were doing so much to change so much, and in wider policing beyond the SDS, I have to say as well, because there was a lot of things that we were doing to try to modernise the response in other areas. It just wasn't something that was a consideration that I had. It really wasn't.
Given that some of the previous managers had been aware of it,
Yes.
One example is DCI Dell being told by HN104 Carlo Saracchi that he'd been in a relationship,
Yes.
at least one relationship. How is it that this wasn't discussed more broadly?
Passed on. I can't explain that. I'm sorry. It should have been dealt with in a way that would mean lessons would have been learned and mechanisms put in place to do everything possible to avoid any such issue occurring again. But I can't explain how many of the other behaviours that go back many years before didn't lead to action that it should have led to, which would have been a deterrence for people. It would have, if you deal with these issues, it creates a position where people know they can't behave like that, and that wasn't done.
And so was that part of the failing, that because these matters weren't addressed, no steps were taken in terms of any disciplinary action or any action that would be of a disadvantage to the UCOs? that led to that
that was
practice being continued.
Yeah, that was an absolute failing of leadership.
Practically, what would strong leadership to prevent sexual relationships undercover look like?
So whenever any of the various incidents that I've become aware of through this inquiry had emerged, that they were dealt with properly and robustly, that would have sent a very clear message, and that the lessons learned from those events were put in place to make sure that, as far as humanly possible, you mitigate against those things happening again. And none of that seems to have occurred.
We've heard in the case of Mark Jenner, for instance,
Yes.
he moved in with his sexual partner at the time. What steps could have been taken, in your view, to monitor that situation and mitigate against that sexual relationship taking place?
So that, for me, is the cover officer and the DI, and the loyalty is to the organisation and to the tactic, and to the public, and the protection of the UC by making sure you're suitably intrusive to make sure that doesn't happen, because so many of these people are in relationships, stable relationships, before they join the SDS. And from the accounts I've heard of people leaving their partners and going off with targets, none of which I knew until this inquiry, all of that properly managed and addressed at the time, rather than a focus being on the retention of the secrecy of the unit, would have stopped a number of these behaviours then occurring thereafter. But none of that seems to have happened, and I cannot understand why.
What about the appropriateness of an undercover officer moving in with a member of the public?
So again, it's absolutely unacceptable. It shouldn't have happened. That collateral intrusion into the lives of others, where the officer's living a lie, it goes against all of the protections that are in place around the deployment of the tactic. And a lot of this is post-Ripper that this is occurring. So that should not have occurred.
Point 8, the new TAC course. You required all the operatives to undertake the new TAC course if they wish to continue in the SDS, whatever the form that took with the SPT. Only one officer chose to do that. In terms of that personnel review that we've looked at already, the one written by HN773 is it any surprise to you that the officers who were in place as you took over management actually decided to leave?
No, listen, I think I may have described this siege mentality. Perspective had been lost by the unit and the operatives. And in many ways, I don't blame them. I blame the various signs that were missed, the opportunities to deal with this in years before. Also, don't forget, the NUTAC course had a significant attrition rate. So I think the data will be available, I'm sure, to this inquiry, but I think it was around 50%, if not more, people who didn't pass it. So it didn't surprise me.
9, the lack of knowledge and awareness of SDS regarding the legislative and national guidance for operatives' involvement in crime.
Yeah.
Were you aware at all of some of significant criminal activity that some of the UCOs had been involved in?
I wasn't. I know subsequently I referenced it in my statement. I became aware of apparently very serious criminality. I don't know when I became aware of it, but well after I had served in the Counter-Terrorism Command as the Detective Chief Superintendent. And that involved, and I see from October of last year, admissions from the Metropolitan Police, the releasing of mink into, I think it was Hampshire, 3,000 to 6,000 mink. I recall being told about firebombing of stores, an attack at Debenhams. None of that. This inquiry will know far more about it than I. I think that knowledge came to me when I was the Chief Constable lead for Undercover in circa 2014. It may have been a little bit earlier. And by the way, some of those cases, sorry, I'm not sure if they were the MPOIU or the SDS. I'm not sure. I'm sure the inquiry will know that.
So that was way out of the guidelines in terms of officers being involved in minor criminal activity.
So having, spent most of my policing career in covert policing, verbal enthusiasm, minor role in crime, properly managed, properly authorised, properly controlled. This is activity that should never have occurred, was unregulated. I have no idea what's in any authorisation documents, but none of that should have happened.
10 and 11 taken together, insufficient understanding of the implications of agent provocateur and the risk that SDS long-term deployments penetrated organisations to such an extent that the unit was directing those targeted.
Yes.
Is there anything further you want to say beyond what you've said already in terms of officers getting to a position of responsibility within groups and the risk of agent provocateur?
No, I mean, they go hand in hand, as you say, and that, I'm afraid, is a significant risk that we'd have actually been directing events in London as opposed to preventing them. I had a real concern about that.
What was your understanding of any operatives who were involved in groups where they were causing disruption of the activities? So either causing interpersonal problems between members of the group or trying to stop them being as effective as they might be. Was that any part of what you understood the UCO's deployments to be?
No, and I'm not aware of those issues, I don't think, no.
Would that have been an appropriate use of a UCO?
On what you've told me, I'd be concerned about it. I'd need to understand more about that, but it seems that would operate outside of the legal framework.
Point 12, absence of meaningful governance and oversight. Is there anything further that you want to add?
No, just that so much has been done in that space around independent regulation and oversight that we're in a much better position now. But that was, lacking, specifically with regards to the SDS. And not good enough in crime either, but much improved now.
And point 13, in terms of finance, over the page. You make reference at paragraph 214 to special payments and allowances that you put a stop to.
Yes.
Do you want to make any further comment on that?
I don't think so. Just that the entire management of the money that was provided around the SDS was incredibly poorly managed. And I know Detective Superintendent McKinney did a significant amount of work to try and address and resolve that.
Moving on from this now, behind tab B75, MPS 0746812, at page 4, please. This is the standing operating procedure, the closure of SDS operatives. It's a document dated the 24th of 1st, 2008. Sorry, if we go back to the first page, is this a document that you recognise?
I don't remember from the time, and forgive me, I don't remember, I've read this recently.
This is a document authored by HN35. It's largely to do with the post-SDS redeployment and career trajectory of SDS operatives.
Okay. Yep.
You recognise the person who wrote it. Page 4, please. Down at the bottom, the return of covert assets, vehicles, passports, credit and debit cards, licences, phones, etc.
Yes.
Was there any understanding that police officers had continued to use their undercover identities post their operation coming to a close at this time?
No, well, that should most certainly not happen.
So we know that HN16 continued to deceive women known as Ellie and Wendy to this inquiry, and having sex with Ellie in his cover identity as late as 2015, long after he'd left the field, and continued communicating with her in his cover identity until 2018. And we also understand in relation to HN18, Robert Hastings, that he continued to deceive Maya, having sex with Maya in his cover identity as late as 2015 and communicating with her in his cover identity until 2016. What could have been done, as far as you're aware now, to prevent such ongoing abuse of those relationships?
It's really difficult. I mean, I didn't know about the first example you gave. I've not followed that in the inquiry. I've mentioned the second example, which is abhorrent and shouldn't have happened.
The first person, HN16, was James Thompson,
right.
who was the person who, there was various, both financial misconduct that was looked into, and also a gun, an operation that suggested there was a gun that was being acquired in France. That was part of his deployment. I don't know if that rings any bells with you.
I have some limited knowledge of Thompson, now you mention the name, because of this inquiry that should have been dealt with properly and wasn't. I'm at a loss of words, by the way, with regards to how they've conducted themselves as human beings and police officers. Had we known when we were closing down the SDS, and we should have known because we should have been passed information from the past that we weren't. In fact, arguably, as I keep saying, it should have been closed down well before I closed it down. We could have taken steps specifically to deal with these individuals with regards to their misconduct and to ensure that we protected those women from them. We didn't know about these actions at the time and these behaviours. And hindsight's a wonderful thing. I'm not sure that at the time, having no reason to believe these operatives were behaving like this, there's very much we could have done, but that's very easy for me to say now. I don't know I can help you with that.
Would monitoring their work phones, their electronic communications, have been something that would have been available to the managers to be able to do?
Where there's grounds to do things like that, of course, but at this stage, with the knowledge that we had, and if I can talk about that period of time and the officers I've talked about, Frankie Flood as the DCI and Julian McKinney as Detective Superintendent, I don't know the knowledge of Detective Chief Superintendent Zinzan or Detective Superintendent Fuller on these issues. I would find it hard to believe they were aware of these issues and wouldn't have communicated them to me. You have to justify actions like that against police officers. There was a failure of the corporate memory to be handed over, had that been done. So even by not dealing with these issues when they arose previously, it led to not only further issues happening, but those further issues continuing because we didn't know about what sorts of behaviours had been undertaken. What I will say, and I know there was probably some concerns in some quarters around the decision to close down the SDS, this stopped it. This stopped by and large the behaviours. I appreciate you giving me the examples of these two individuals, but we stop this continuing intrusion into people's private lives and the abuse of members of the public by these operatives by closing down the unit.
What
But in the absence of any information about what they were doing, I'm not sure what we could have done.
even without any suspicion, what about dip sampling, phone records, mobile phone records, or checking passports, I think now the passports are supposed to be retained at back office, is that right?
I think, well, I don't know, I can't answer that question around the passports now. They would all have been expected to have been handed in unless there was a reason around mythology and protection of individuals to have some sort of ongoing deployment, which in the SDS I cannot believe was the case. All of their items, phones, email addresses should have all been stopped, all suspended, all finished. Obviously what you can't deal with is the fact that they've got the contact details for people that they have been engaged in their undercover lives. These relationships were not known to us. There was no, and I would have mentioned it in my closing down comments for the report that I know has not been recovered by this inquiry. I would have spoken about any misconduct if I'd have known about it. So again, the basis for us to do more, I think, was absent at that time. And that is because we're entirely handicapped by the failure of others to deal with these issues previously, or even pass on the behaviours to us. Never mind deal with them. Let us know what had happened in the past, because we had no idea.
What steps could managers have taken during the tenure of the officer's operation to detect any misconduct?
I think through some of the cover officers turning up at premises, checking where people were. As you say, if there were any concerns, and that independence of relationship as a cover officer with the UCO, and if there were any concerns, then there are various methods, you've mentioned some of them, to check and verify the integrity, the claims with regards to where they are and when they're there of UCOs. But the SDS operating model didn't lend itself to any of that.
Looking behind tab B76, now MPS 0527035. Page 4, please. So this is a proposed audit of SDS finances, 13th of May 2008. Poor financial management was one of those reasons to close the unit. Is that right?
Yes.
At paragraph 2 then, please. So a review was undertaken of SDS finances in 2007. Is that something you were aware of?
I was, yeah.
And is that the only financial audit that had taken place of SDS finances?
I don't know, I can't answer that, I'm afraid. I was aware of the work by Laurie Ford, and this was all managed and dealt with by Detective Superintendent McKinney. I don't know of any other financial audits.
In terms of blacklisting, was that something that you were familiar with at the time?
No, blacklisting
in terms of information being sent to organisations that would detail persons' identities, and which would lead to them being prevented from gaining work in the construction industry or various areas of work. Was that something that you were familiar with once you had taken over your role in SO15?
No, I've read about that, but I knew nothing about that.
Had you
I've read about it subsequently, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of your understanding of the SDS model of undercover operations, you've recognised that it's disproportionately intrusive and resistant to scrutiny, or was at the time. Did your review or did your understanding of the SDS operations consider only those serving officers, or did you also look at those that were had moved on to private bodies? Were you aware of any undercover officers moving on to work as, say, in security in private organisations?
No, I think, if I'm candid, we had so much that we needed to do. We focused on what was in front of us. We needed to change the SDS. We got on with that. There was a lot happening at that time with regards to the threats against the UK. It might be that subsequently, and I'm sure through this inquiry and the management of the consequences of the SDS through the Met, that's been done. But at the time, because of what we knew, I don't think it merited it. Which is that we didn't know about the behaviours that you are now aware of.
In terms of private sector continuation of such methods of intruding on people's lives, recording personal information, their activities, particularly around trade union activities and that sort of thing, that being outside your control, is it fair to say that you diagnosed the dangers of the method of reporting on people who were seen as, say, troublemakers within the particular industry, and you closed one institutional vehicle for that, but left open other private avenues for that sort of activity?
Well, I wasn't aware of... Yeah, sorry to cut across you. I wasn't aware of other actors in that space. We moved on with the SDS. We were trying to make sure that we were fit for purpose to deal with what was a real threat to the UK from international terrorism. This inquiry, indeed Operation Hearn, and other activity by the Met may have identified other bad actors, if I could call them those. But at the time, I had no grounds for having concerns about any wider issues beyond the SDS.
Had you heard of the Economic League or the Consulting Association at the time when you took over management?
I don't believe so, no. No.
So you weren't aware of any information being sent, intelligence reports being sent out from Special Branch to private industry?
I can't recall that, no. With my role and what I was doing as a senior investigating officer, no. I now, I'd be concerned about what you've just said. I think I might have read some stuff about that. It's always hard to compartmentalise this, as I've said, but it wasn't something that was on my agenda to deal with, that I was aware of, needed addressing.
Is there any role for police officers providing that sort of service to private industry?
Well, we need a very collaborative relationship with all sectors, but wherever we work with partners in the private sector, everything should be above board, proportionate, fair, and any sensitive or personal information shouldn't be shared with anybody. If that's the suggestion of what occurred, that shouldn't happen.
Can I move, please, to the closing report behind tab B78, MPS 0722622, page 2. The closing report was drafted on the 25th of June 2009. DS HN773 was the author. Do you recall reading this document?
From the inquiry, yes.
But you weren't aware of it at the time?
I don't recall it, I'm afraid. No, I think I may have moved at this point.
Is it right that you were still in SO 15 up until 2010?
Well, I went to the Home Office on a secondment around National Security and Counter-Terrorism Advisor. I think, and I asked the records, that would confirm when I left. I think I'd gone at this point.
Having read this report for the purposes of this inquiry,
Yes.
does this chime with the findings that you had made from your own investigations about the SDS and the concerns that you were raising at the time?
Well, I think it provides a validation of the decision from the work done by DCI Flood and Superintendent McKinney, my view of what needed to happen, and Mr. Clark's ultimate determination. I think it provides an absolute validation that it was the right decision.
We can see at page 4, at paragraph 1 of this report, that it was commissioned after the closure of the SDS and relies mainly on the documents created and retained by them. Do you accept that the information that was relied on for the closing report was information that was available to you at the time that you were DCS?
It may have been available to me, but with my span of responsibility, there's a lot of the documents, as you know, weren't shared with me. But of course, I accept that there are documents that this report would have relied on that existed in the SDS.
Just in terms of helping you with the dates that you were still in charge of operational support, paragraph 6 of your witness statement might help, because it appears that you remained in role as a DCS for operational support until July 2011.
Okay. I'm not sure, and if it's an error, it's on my part. I think I might have been on the strategic command course then, actually.
Okay, no, that's not the right reference. We can have a look at that anyway.
Okay, forgive me.
We'll clarify that. That's the wrong paragraph, so sorry about that.
Okay.
The report, as you set out at paragraph 719 of your witness statement, sets out the lack of professional objectivity, financial oversight, poor management of operatives, inappropriate training and poor standards of behaviour, and general lack of good governance and supervision of the unit and its operatives. That, you say, is essentially what you've set out in your witness statement as to the key issues that arose from your understanding of the SDS.
Yes, and in that report, I think it talks about the weeding or destroying of some material, because as the inquiry knows, and we talked about the general registry docket where I did a report which I think more or less would consist of the items that we went through at paragraph 612 of my statement, and that's never been found or never been released to me, which was endorsed by Acting Assistant Commissioner Clark.
If we can go to the closing report at page 28, please. It does address the Tradecraft Manual and Chapter 6 of the Tradecraft Manual. So this is on MPS 0722622, the closing report, going back to that report now. Page 28. And we can see there reference to what was set out in the Tradecraft Manual in relation to drugs and alcohol in the top half of that page, and at the bottom half in relation to sexual relationships. You've said quite clearly that this should not have been the guidance, this wasn't appropriate guidance.
That's correct.
There appeared to be a conflict between what was set out in writing in the Tradecraft Manual, which all officers were required to study in the first week of their recruitment to the SDS, and what was said to them latterly by DCI Dell. He was in place as the DCI of the SDS between July 2001 to the 10th of, October 2005, he gave a verbal prohibition on sexual relationships. But in terms of your experience, how important is it to write down what the policies are, the regulations, set clear boundaries? Was a verbal prohibition sufficient?
So I'm pleased at least he did that, Mr. Dell. I didn't know about this document. This should never have been written in a document. It should never have been even suggested to undercover operatives that this was permitted. I've absolutely no doubt, and I've said this already, that DCI Flood and Detective Superintendent McKinney would not have allowed any of the drug taking or the intimate relationships, any of the sorts of behaviours that we've heard from a plethora of different ex-SDS officers. My expectation, understanding, was the same as that was delivered on the NUTAC course around these issues and not getting involved in intimate relationships. That was an absolute no-no. And mechanisms to deal with situations where you could be vulnerable to that, how you avoided it. None of that seems to have been applied within the SDS, which is further compounded by the fact that they'd had such catastrophic episodes with officers behaving badly. So I've not seen that manual. I think in the evidence today, Superintendent McKinney had not seen it until, I think, much later after I'd left. And it should never have been, any suggestion of any of these behaviours should never have been in any manual whatsoever. And the lessons around the abhorrent behaviour, much of which, we've heard around the drug taking, the coercive controlling behaviour, the sexual abuse, I think the domestic abuse, the drink driving, violence. I am unable to explain how any of this was allowed to continue. My only offer to you is that, notwithstanding all of those things that occurred, as soon as I understood what this unit was about and how they conducted their undercover activities, which led to all of those behaviours, and they were never addressed previously, almost instantaneously I closed it down. And had I known of any of those behaviours, they would have been properly investigated and the officers dealt with. And had that been done, and I know I'm repeating myself, many years before, we would not have seen the continuance of these behaviours in the way they were undertaken by these operatives.
We've heard Commander Pearce's evidence. He was head of the Special Branch between 1999 and mid-2003, that he believes sexual relations undercover sometimes could be deemed acceptable. How does that misconception arise by somebody so senior in Special Branch?
Yeah, well, that possibly lends itself to the challenges that you had in the SDS. So I wouldn't agree with Mr. Pearce.
Okay, your expectation would have been that that should have been clamped down on had he become aware of that?
The evidence to this inquiry from so many different quarters about what then happened, multiple relationships, improper relationships, the infringement on people's privacy, the deceit of so many people, especially women, with regards to sexual relationships, all speaks for itself. And maybe Mr. Pearce's position was part of the beginning of the problem.
It's likely to be a continuation as rather than the beginning of the problem, Paul.
Continuation of the problem, forgive me.
In terms of destruction of SDS material, you've already touched on that. You've talked about the weeding out of information. Were you aware of wholesale destruction of files from the SDS after its closure?
No.
Was there any shredding of documents as far as you were aware?
I have no knowledge of any of that, no.
HN367 says in this report at pages 17 to 18, and I haven't got the actual paragraph number, but HN367 was unable to access files on the SDS computers after the SDS had shut down as, quote, everyone appeared to have forgotten the passwords. Sorry, it's because it's not this document. It's MPS 0722667. At page 17 to 18, please. I don't know if you need me to take you to the actual reference for that quote, but is that something you were aware of, that people had not provided all the codes for the computers to the SDS?
I think this is the first I've heard of that, but if I may, I think I mentioned it in my statement. There was this phrase, this terminology about continuity special branch. And I've mentioned that these individuals forgot they were police officers and the higher standards that we're held to account to. And all of this is indicative of why the SDS should have been closed down years ago, because of the lost culture of this organisation. None of it surprises me. It's incredibly disappointing, and they've let policing down in a majorly significant way.
It may be that you can't help us with this, but we heard in evidence from HN18 Robert Hastings that in his reporting there was a raw report that looked at various events that happened over a period of days, and one of the reports referenced Maya when he met Maya at an Electroworks event. And out of the sequence of those reports that were individually made into the sanitised reports that were then disseminated, the one report relating to Maya wasn't available. It wasn't provided to the inquiry. And are you able to assist at all with whether you have subsequently become aware of any destruction of documents relating to the deceived women?
I'm not aware of that. I think the only reference I can give is in the report around the weeding of documents that's described by the author of that report. That shouldn't have happened. And I think it goes to the behaviour of the people that we were dealing with and why we had to shut the unit down. I can't assist any further than that.
Are you able to help us with the destruction of the file on Michael Mansfield, KC?
I'm not, I'm afraid. I didn't know there was a file on Michael Mansfield.
You've talked about your relations with the Home Office. In terms of the information that was being sent up to the Home Office in relation to the SDS, we understand that the Home Office would have received the annual reports from the SDS up until about 1989, because that was the point at which they continued, they were funding the SDS up until 1989,
Right.
not past that, so they didn't receive the annual reports post-1989. What was your understanding of the relationship between the Home Office and the SDS, if any, during your tenure?
Yeah, so I was asked this in my Rule 9, and I had no knowledge of any relationship between the SDS and the Home Office. Obviously, that predated my coming into post as the Detective Chief Superintendent. I had no meetings with the Home Office about the SDS, and I had no knowledge of any relationship between the two.
What communications did you have with the Home Office at the time that you were in SO15?
What broadly, as a...
Did any of it relate to the SDS? Were you able to give them any information at all about the operations?
No, I need to be clear. I had no communication with the Home Office about the SDS.
What about with the Cabinet?
The Cabinet Office? No communications whatsoever with the Cabinet Office. That may have occurred previously, but not when I was the Detective Chief Superintendent.
Was there any...
Not that I recall anything at all, I'm sorry. No.
Was there any political influence on tasking or reporting, as far as you're aware, either during your tenure or prior to you arriving?
To my knowledge, absolutely not, no.
Are you able to assist with any political involvement, especially around significant events like the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence or the police shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes?
Around the SDS, absolutely not, no, sorry.
In terms of the Operation Magma documents that you referred to already.
Is this A and B? Forgive me.
A and B,
yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
So the officers we know is Peter Francis and HN123, and their witness statements that they provided in terms of litigation in 2003. They specifically set out references to violence, sexual infidelity, and the psychiatric impact of deep infiltration. References made to sexual relationships of other officers during that they had first-hand knowledge of.
I see.
Is it right? Is it your evidence that you didn't have any knowledge of those witness statements?
I can categorically say I know nothing about any of that until this inquiry shared the information with me.
Did you know that two officers had brought a claim against the MPS?
I had no recollection of that whatsoever. And in my management of the SDS, that would have been at the forefront of my focus and would have led to a lot of the issues that you've raised in questions to me being robustly dealt with. I knew nothing about it.
In terms of Commander Williams's role in heading up the Gold Group to address Operation Magma and the issues arising out of the claims by Officer A and Officer B, did you have any communication with her about the SDS and the issues that she had dealt with in that respect?
No, the only conversations with Commander Williams were positive conversations. Before I became the Detective Chief Superintendent, when I was in SO13 and Commander Williams was the commander for SO12, and I know there was at least a meeting about what we needed around undercover capability and national security, counter-terrorism, policing efforts, and that was it. And I think that was at the period that myself and Detective Superintendent Fuller, so me from SO13, Detective Superintendent Fuller from SO12, started to look at what capability we needed, and we visited the United States and spoke to some colleagues there around what they were doing.
So in your conversations with Commander Williams, were you looking at specific concerns about the SDS?
No. We were looking at concerns around the lack of a capability that we needed to deal with the threats facing the United Kingdom around undercover profile. Nothing about officers A and B. None of that was ever brought to my attention. None of it.
Would you have expected that sort of thing to have been drawn to your attention had she had an understanding of what was the content of those claims?
Well, having become the Detective Chief Superintendent of the SDS, I would have expected that to have been a significant part of the corporate knowledge of the SDS in recent years. But none of that. And to my knowledge, the same would apply with DCI Flood and Superintendent McKinney, and indeed Temporary Assistant Commissioner Clark and Commander McDowell. I mean, I should caution speaking for them, but certainly none of that was made aware to me, none of it.
In terms of looking out for the welfare of officers,
Yes.
would it have been helpful to you to have seen these witness statements?
Yes, very incredibly helpful.
And you have had chance to read them, have you, since?
I have seen a précis of both of the statements, not the full statements, a précis of the relevant material that was provided to me by my own lawyers.
And how would that have assisted you in terms of looking out for the welfare of officers under your command?
Well, it raised huge alarm bells about what needed to be done. I'd also wanted to know what had happened about the allegations that are contained in the statements from both officers as well.
Would you have expected steps to have been taken in relation to that?
I would.
Those allegations. What sort of steps would you have expected?
There should have been an investigation.
What sort of investigation?
An independent investigation into the claims that were made by those officers.
And when you say independent, do you mean somebody within the Met Service but outside of the SDS, or a different police force, or what sort of oversight body?
Yeah, so ideally for me, my own position would be to bring somebody in from an outside force, properly vetted, to investigate those allegations properly, with access to every piece of information, every individual that they needed to see. At the very least, I would have expected the Department of Professional Standards to have had those allegations referred to them so that they could investigate those matters, but I would much have preferred an independent police investigation into them, just for the reassurance of third parties and the people involved that it wasn't the Met investigating the Met. It should have been an independent police force. And to my knowledge, and the inquiry will know more than I, nothing happened.
And when you say the investigator to be properly vetted, is it your understanding that an investigation could have been conducted safely without exposing the unit to any risk, any serious risk?
I've dealt with a number of incredibly sensitive investigations, discreetly, thoroughly, bringing in vetted officers where there is concerns about wrongdoing from the security forces or policing. It's the sort of reassurance that the public have got a right to expect, and that should have been done, and to my knowledge, it wasn't done.
In terms of welfare, you talk about the impact of long-term undercover deployments at paragraph 245 of your witness statement, and you recognise the impact that that could have on undercover operatives and their families. In terms of steps that can be taken to mitigate against such risks, is there anything in particular you want to add in terms of how undercover officers can be protected against the risks of long-term undercover deployment?
The very nature of these deployments made it incredibly challenging to ensure the well-being of these officers and their families, may I say. This inquiry will have heard of the measures that were in place with regards to transitioning those officers back into policing. Now, today, by today's standards, we have moved seismically in how we look after officers. But I have to say the challenges of the deployments that were undertaken for so many years would have meant that it would have been very difficult to look after the welfare of those officers properly. They shouldn't have occurred for those period of times in the way that they did.
Finally, Mr. Boutcher, just in terms of where you went on your career trajectory after the SDS or SO15,
yes.
You've touched on it a little bit already, but you have obviously had quite a lot of dealings with national undercover projects.
Yes.
Including in 2014, you were appointed ACPO National Policing Lead for Undercover Policing.
I was.
And in 2016, you produced the action plan for progress on the HMIC recommendations arising out of the 2014 HMIC report
Yes.
on undercover policing. And in 2016, you produced the authorised professional practice for undercover policing in conjunction with the College of Policing.
I did. I was asked to take that role as the ACPO lead because of an incredibly critical report by the HMIC then into undercover policing. So I was asked by Chief Constable John Murphy and Chief Constable Mick Creedon from Merseyside Police and Derbyshire Police respectively, who were the crime and organised crime leads for either then ACPO or MPCC, forgive me, I don't know which was the title then. So I then delivered an action plan to deliver on the recommendations of that very critical report to the Home Secretary, who was then Theresa May, and that was held in the House of Commons Library, and it led to us changing significantly the selection process for undercover officers, the management of undercover operations, and we produced the first authorised professional practice APP for undercover policing in conjunction with the College of Policing. And much, much more work has now been done with regards to reassuring everybody of the use of the tactic of undercover. So it's now in a much stronger statutory framework. I talked about the Cheers Criminal Conduct Act of 2021. Only last April 2025, there was a report into undercover policing by the Office of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office that looked at the standard of RIPA authorisations, that's IPCO, across a number of units. It produced a report with 17 recommendations. It praised the overall standard of those authorisations. There were some areas that they wanted to see improvements. So Brian Levinson is the Investigatory Powers Commissioner who very robustly and rigorously, and I meet him, oversees the use and authorisation of covert powers. This inquiry, I have to say very definitively, has led to significant improvements in undercover policing. You have raised issues of inappropriate behaviour. The IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Complaints, would be appointed to investigate any wrongdoing. I think the journalists and activists who have worked to lobby for this inquiry and all of the aforementioned have made sure that this tactic is now unrecognisable from where it was during the days of the SDS.
You are, since 2023, the Chief Constable of the PSNI.
I am.
And you have been heavily involved in the some of the legacy investigations relating to the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
I have, yes.
Is there anything further that you want to add to your evidence at the moment before we take a break for Rule 10?
I don't think so, thank you.
How long do you estimate you will need?
Probably about 15 minutes.
Very well.
So thank you. Mr. Boutcher, just a point of clarification first. Can we have your witness statement up, please, at paragraph 245 on page 51? And this is in relation to the A and B litigation. Should just be on the screen in front of you, if that's
sorry.
easier. And this is in relation to welfare. You say you were conscious of the need to reintegrate officers back into a more normalised policing, and I do recall that ex-SDS officers had taken legal action against the MPS for what they claimed to be failures in supporting them. And if we can turn to paragraph 260 as well, which is on page 55.
Yeah.
Paragraph 260. Again, in relation to welfare, historical litigation by SDS operatives is referenced. Was that a reference to the A and B litigation?
No, I didn't know the information about A and B. I was aware, I think, that previously, and it's not unusual in these types of deployments, that people had said they'd not been sufficiently supported, but I know nothing about A and B and the details that have been provided to me through this inquiry.
Were you aware of other officers that had taken legal action against the MPS for failures in supporting them?
I have a recollection that there had been some action with regards to, and I don't know any of the detail, it predated me, with regards to failings of support for officers, not of any of the information that has been provided around officers A and B.
So you were aware of the litigation and it had something to do with welfare, but you weren't aware of the detail of it?
I don't even know it was A and B. I just know that previously there had been concerns raised, and I think it might have been sort of internal tribunals around support for officers, but not the detail that sits behind A and B. I don't associate that with the litigation for A and B.
In terms of your evidence about a failure of corporate memory and that not being passed on, so that when you get to somebody in your position that's coming in later in the day, you're not in a position to deal with some of the issues that should have been dealt with. Did you raise issues that you became aware of with your seniors such that that could be passed on, keeping that corporate memory alive?
Well, I think, bear in mind, this was quite a groundbreaking moment of closing down a unit that had been going since 1968. We were starting a new chapter with regards to undercover to be undertaken in a completely different way. So I don't see that there was very much I needed to pass on that wasn't corporately collected. We've got a closing down report. I did a minute around what I saw as the rationale, the justification for closing down the SDS. I appreciate it's not before the inquiry, but it was done and endorsed by Assistant Commissioner Clark. So I don't think I'd not experienced the inappropriate behaviours or knew of the inappropriate behaviours that others clearly knew about, which I think should have been passed on to me and should have been made aware to me. I was trying to deal with ensuring that we transitioned to have an undercover capability that was fit for the threats and proportionate with regards to how it was deployed to the challenges around national security of the day. And the SDS was not fit for purpose. It was not proportionate with regards to the subjects that it was deployed against. So we were moving into an entirely new territory and approach in that space of national security undercover deployments through the Special Projects team. So I don't think the relevance of the question is there really with regards to me handing on only And I didn't know about the terrible behaviours that have been highlighted through this inquiry. And that includes officers A and B, I need to be very clear.
Did you have concerns to ensure that the lessons you'd learnt from the SDS and closing down the SDS were passed on to influence the tradecraft in the MPOIU? Were you aware of the MPOIU, the existence of it and the types of operations that they were?
I was aware of the MPOIU. I had nothing to do with the MPOIU. I think, and I've learned through this inquiry, that Commander McDowell had taken some role with the MPOIU, and he was certainly aware of my approach, my position, my views around the SDS, as was, of course, Assistant Commissioner, then Temporary Assistant Commissioner Clark. But I never had any interactions with the MPOIU.
As aside from Commander McDowell, was there any other former SDS or any manager in the line of command for the SDS who went over to assist with MPOIU management?
So I've only through this inquiry have seen that I think DCI Flood at some stage may have had something to do with assisting with the MPOIU, and I do know, but this is anecdotal, and there was a colleague, Detective Chief Superintendent Clive Timmons, who I think at one point would have been a similar calibre to myself around experience in investigations and as a senior investigating officer. I think he, and I spoke to him about the SDS, I think he had at some point, some role in looking at something to do with the MPOIU, but I can't be certain on that, I'm afraid. And he was, he was part of the Counter-Terrorism Command.
Thank you. Can I draw your attention, please, to page 76 of your witness statement, and in particular, the box just below paragraph 349 that sets out reference to a suggestion by HN773 that he was informed by HN118 about MPOIU officers Mark Kennedy and Marco at the G8 in June 2007, making reference to intimate relationships with women.
Yes, I can read that. Yep. I think that's the reference I was making to DCI Flood being involved in something with the MPIU from the documents that you provided. I wasn't aware of that before.
Does that ring any bells with knowledge that you had around that time?
No. Kennedy became obviously a very notorious figure subsequently with regards to his actions, but I didn't know about this at the time, no.
Are you surprised you weren't told about this at the time, given that this allegedly took place in the month or two before you taking over your position in August, September 2007?
Yeah, I would have thought I would have been, because of the proximity to when I took over, but it didn't happen when I was there, or the information provided occurs at a time that predates me. But I wasn't aware of that.
Were you aware of? Okay, you weren't aware of any knowledge of DCI Flood about potential intimate relationships that undercover officers were having in the MPIOU?
I don't recall that at all. No, absolutely not. No.
Were you aware of any detail around Operation Muscat, which was an investigation into Miss Steele's search for John Dines, which was HN5, who moved out to New Zealand and subsequently to Australia? Are you familiar with that set of circumstances now?
Only through the inquiry, yes.
So did you have any knowledge of it
Absolutely none, no.
back in 2007,
No,
2008?
not at all.
There's a file note from January 2006 which relates to Miss Steele's first visit to New Zealand since her father's death, and it reports on her visiting family and with actions to follow. And there's a further report of the 9th of January 2006, again reporting on her visit to New Zealand. Again, is that a failure of corporate knowledge? Should you have been made aware of this significant operation and intelligence about, or information about a woman's search for an undercover officer?
I think there's a list of things that I should have been made aware of, going back to Bob Lambert's behaviour as an operative, and then when he ran the unit. And I think I read through the inquiry something like 5 out of 10 operatives had admitted sexual indiscretions and intimate relationships. I should have known about the details of A and B. Thompson, I should have known very clearly about Thompson and what he'd been doing and the way that was not dealt with properly. And I should also have known about the Dine story, but none of that. That's my point about the leadership not doing what they should have done, in my view. And I never knew any of these issues existed until this inquiry.
Finally, Mr. Boutcher, can you help us just with the national intelligence model? We've heard evidence from both Julian McKinney and Janet Williams about how that control strategy worked and how that fed into targeting of the SDS.
Taskings, yes.
Tasking of the SDS.
I would say taskings.
Did the SDS reporting itself influence that control strategy? In other words, did it become quite cyclical in that the SDS's own intelligence was determining what that control strategy tasking became?
So, if I understand you correctly, my assessment, if this assists, is that the SDS weren't really tasked. They just went out and hoovered up all sorts of information, whether it was private information, collateral information, whether it was LPP, journalistic material, and they did a dump of that information back into Special Branch. I'm not sure the national intelligence model with regards to tasking of covert assets properly worked with regards to the SDS. I don't think it did. I don't think that's the model that they adopted.
So those are all the questions that we have, and there's no re-examination, I'm told.
Thank you very much. I have one question for you, if I may. I was told yesterday by Julian McKinney that he was very pleased that you had accepted his recommendations, which caused the closure of the SDS.
Right.
My understanding of your evidence is that it was your decision, even though plainly he agreed with it. Am I right in reaching that conclusion?
I think, firstly, I'm incredibly supportive of Detective Superintendent McKinney. I'm very clear that I made the decision based on information from Detective Superintendent McKinney and DCI Flood that enough was enough and that I was going to close the unit down. I did the rationale, and I went to the Assistant Commissioner, and I don't want to overstep my my rank at that stage. For clarity, Assistant Commissioner Peter Clark, it was his decision to close the unit down upon my representations to him about the issues that I've set out in my evidence. But I made the decision to go to Mr. Clark to make that determination very clearly. I think I even recall, sir, if I can assist, Mr. McKinney and Mr. Flood were working tirelessly to try to make the SDS work in a way that would transition into a modern day capability, and I said enough's enough.
Thank you. May I thank you for taking a day to come to London to give personal evidence before the inquiry, when I know you have to take a full day and the time to travel here and back off the very demanding and difficult task that you currently have.
Thank you, sir.
Very grateful to you.
No, it's
Thank you.
the least I can do, sir.
That concludes the oral hearings that are taking place in this centre. There will be some public evidence, a very limited amount, which I anticipate will be given virtually in September. There will also be closed evidence, which I will hear, obviously, in closed circumstances. But may I, therefore, take this opportunity to express my thanks to a variety of people, and to do so publicly. First of all, to the technical staff and the transcribers, without whose efforts we simply could not have conducted these proceedings at all. Very grateful indeed to them. I know that they've had very long hours imposed upon them, and I'm grateful to them for performing their duties without a hint of complaint. Thank you. May I also acknowledge the immense amount of hard work that has been done in demanding circumstances by the inquiry staff, including the legal team. We could not have had these hearings had they not performed their duties with not only remarkable efficiency, but also enthusiasm and dedication. May I also thank the legal representatives of all participants, both those on the state side and those on the non-state side. From not only what I hear and see in the hearing room, but from what I learn from behind the scenes when I'm informed about what is going on, I'm aware that you have represented the interests of your respective clients fully, with complete propriety, and to their great advantage, and I'm very grateful to you for doing so. And finally, but by no means least, can I thank those in the public gallery for the care and attention that you have devoted to the hearings. You've sat there, listened patiently to remarkable evidence, and with one or two entirely understandable outbursts of clapping and the occasional expression of a view by a sigh or something of that kind. You've done so without in any way disrupting the proceedings. This is how a public inquiry ought to work, and it requires everybody that I've mentioned to permit it to do so. And finally, may I express personal thanks for the kindness and consideration with which my wife's personal circumstances have been dealt with, even though it has caused what I hope have been very modest interruptions to the progress of the inquiry. I'm very grateful to you. Very well, we will resume in September. I'm afraid that the report, when it comes out eventually, will be quite a long time off. There's an awful lot to do, not only by me and the staff, but a lot of statutory procedures that have to be gone through before it will emerge, and it will take a fair amount of time for that to happen. But thank you all. I'm very grateful to you.
Bye.